Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where we recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 9th of March, 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So a special Saturday episode for you all to make up for missing yesterday's episode. I didn't want to leave you with two missed episodes this week, and there is a bunch of stuff to get through, of course. So I'm going to dive right into it. Now, I know you guys are probably sick of me talking about the ETF stuff, but just like one update that I want to talk about with regards to the ETH ETF, and this is a big update. This isn't like some kind of small update or me going on a rant or anything like that. This is actually a substantial update. So the SEC met with Grayscale's attorneys and Coinbase with regards to the spot ETH ETF on, I think, March 8th, I think it was, or March 7th maybe, so 1 or 2 days ago. And discussion included analysis of the correlation between the futures markets and the spot markets of ETH. And then Nate continues and says, Coinbase analysis shows correlation between ETH futures and spot markets is every bit as strong as with the Bitcoin markets. Adding that the SEC approved the CME traded Ether futures ETFs, and I'm not sure what grounds for disapproval of spot ETH ETFs would be. Just a very, very strong signal here that the SEC is obviously talking to the relevant people with regards to the ETH ETFs. Really strong signal that they're going to have a very hard time denying the ETH ETF on the basis of the fact that the ETH futures ETFs and the BTC futures ETFs are very tightly correlated with their respective spot products. And as we know, Grayscale won their lawsuit against the SEC based on this, basically based on the fact that they believed that the futures ETFs are basically the same as a spot ETF, and they should both be approved. And you can see the list of names, I think, in this. I don't think it's on the screenshots here that Nate shared, but there are a list of names attached to this. And Grayscale's one of Grayscale's attorneys that was present was the one that defended Grayscale, or I mean, not defended Grayscale, but like fought for Grayscale on behalf of Grayscale in their lawsuit against the SEC and won. So, you know, you can read between the lines here to an extent, but also it's kind of obvious to me that they would have gone and met with the SEC. We don't know what was said, but like you can read between the lines, and you basically say that Grayscale would have made it clear that if the ETFs were denied, they would probably immediately sue the SEC because they probably got the lawsuit already ready to go, right, drafted up, because I've seen a few people say this, but they have like basically a legal obligation or fiduciary duty to people that hold the ETH trust to sue the SEC if they were to deny this thing because of the fact that they've already gone through the lawsuit with the BTC side of things, and they won that lawsuit. So obviously they're very emboldened here, which makes it really hard for the SEC to even think about denying these things because they're just opening themselves up to more lawsuits, more bullshit, and it will probably be a very quick lawsuit as well because of the fact that you can just rest on the precedent that was set when Grayscale won in October of last year. So this just further kind of signifies to me that the ETH ETFs are definitely getting approved on May 23rd. I still believe that. I see no reason as to why they wouldn't be. I know people, I've given arguments as to why they wouldn't be before, and I've gone through all of that. But yeah, I just thought this was like a big update that I figured I'd talk about for a little bit with you guys because I know that, at this point, as I said, like a lot of people are sick of hearing about the ETFs, but they are one of the major things happening in crypto right now. And, at the end of the day, I want to cover it, especially when it comes to ETH, because I think that a lot of ETH's price action and BTC's price action and the general market's price action is due to these ETFs, since we are, at least 9 months ahead of the general kind of 4-year cycle that I talked about the other day, and how I believe that we don't really have a 4-year cycle anymore. But the ETFs are obviously a substantial part of that, if not the reason that has kind of happened there. And obviously ETH getting an ETF is a really big deal because of the fact that it's kind of the first step in the wave of tokenization that BlackRock wants to initialize on Ethereum, or on, I guess, like within crypto, but I don't know where else they would do it. It makes total sense for them to do it on Ethereum. Whether that be layer 1 or layer 2 remains to be seen. Maybe they do it everywhere. Maybe they make their own layer 2 or something. I don't know what they're going to do. They haven't really published plans on that, but that falls into the bigger roadmap there. And the number one reason I'm so excited about all of this is not because it makes ETH go up, like, yeah, that's cool and all, but it's because that for the longest time, I have strongly believed that Ethereum will become the backbone of the new global financial system. And that's how this happens, right? With BlackRock getting involved, with these other TradFi institutions getting involved, like, they're going to get involved or they're going to die, basically, over a long enough time frame. Obviously, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but we all know what happened to companies that didn't evolve with the internet, right? They went by the wayside. They died. They got a lot smaller. Juggernauts like Blockbuster being the perfect example of one that didn't adapt to things, right? Kodak and another one. Like they just didn't adapt to the digital internet age, and they were left by the wayside. And I think the same thing happens with Ethereum, with crypto, with blockchains generally, where they replace the existing financial system, and then if you don't kind of evolve with it, you get left behind. And I think that these bigger players realize that and they want to integrate with it. And as I've said plenty of times on the refuel before, it doesn't matter if they're centralized, guys. There's always going to be centralized and decentralized ways to interact with what we're building. What matters is the fact that people are actually using it. Like at the end of the day, it's all well and good to build like a hyper decentralized cypherpunk financial system, but if it's only able to be used by a very small group of people, it doesn't actually do much for the world. Like it does it for those small group of people, that's totally fine. But at the end of the day, we're trying to build tools that empower humanity. We're not going to empower humanity by keeping it niche, keeping it kind of like very hard to use, keeping it very inside baseball. We're going to help humanity. We're going to empower humanity for hundreds of years to come by building better systems to manage money with, to manage financial services with, and giving more opportunities to people that don't have them. Like half the world doesn't have access, or at least half the world, probably 3/4 of the world in terms of human population doesn't have access to decent financial services. And the thing is, crypto can give them that access. Obviously, there's still a lot of building to do, but that has always been the ultimate goal. And the ETFs getting kind of approved and tokenized happening on chain and everything moving on chain is how we get there. So bringing the world on chain is our North Star within crypto, and all of this stuff kind of falls into that. But yeah, just figured I'd give you guys an update on that. And I think that, I'll keep giving you updates on this because, as I said, it's very important, but some good movement here. I'm really liking what I'm seeing here. All right, moving on to a tweet from ETH So they put out a nice little tweet here, basically illustrating what the current Ethereum blocks look like and what they're going to look like post 4844. So as you guys know, in 4844, well, when Denkun goes live this week with 4844 coming with it, it creates a new fee market, or it creates a new transaction type called Blobs, which is part of its own fee market outside of the existing Ethereum L1 fee market that we have today. It's part of, or the execution layer fee market, I should say. It's part of the consensus layer. And it's illustrated here. You can see that what it looks like today is that there are blocks on Ethereum. They're made up of various different transactions, such as DeFi related transactions, ETH transfers, NFTs, so on and so forth, as well as L2 related transactions. Now, L2 roll up related transactions, right? Now, post 4844, we're going to have the blocks still, but we're also going to have blobs. And blobs are going to take most of that roll-up or L2 activity for themselves, which means it's taking it away from where it currently sits within call data on the execution layer, which then opens that up to other kind of, I guess, like use cases and other things to fill up. And this has been a discussion in the Ethereum community for quite a while now, what that's actually going to look like. Are we going to see reduced fees by like 20%-ish or 15 to 20% on layer 1 in the short term, because a lot of these rollups and layer 2s are going to start posting all of their data to blobs instead of call data? I don't think it's actually going to be that high. I feel like there's going to be a few L2s that aren't going to do it on day one, or aren't going to do it for a few weeks, I think. A lot of the major ones are doing it on day one from what I've seen. But still, there are other L2 related transactions. And at the same time, like L1 is so kind of congested and so heavily used, and there's so much demand for it, that we already see swings of like 20, 30, 40, 50% on gas on the day. Like I remember, I think yesterday I saw gas at 80 Gwei, now it's at 40 Gwei. That's a 50% swing to the downside in just a day. And obviously it can go up, goes from 40 to 80 Gwei, that's a 100% swing. So when we're talking about giving more space, I guess, to L1, because we're offloading the L2 transactions to blobs, or the L2 related stuff to blobs, it might have like a little effect short term, but it's not really something that I think is going to be felt. And I don't think it's going to be material enough for users to really care about, because at the end of the day, we're already way past the, I guess, point where most users can actually use Ethereum L1. Like at 40 Gwei, I mean, you're pricing out like the vast majority of users. Even at 10 Gwei, I would say you're pricing out a lot of users. But at 40, I mean, it starts getting, and then you go up from there, you're pricing out 99% of users. And obviously that's part of the Ethereum rollup centric roadmap design, where you can use L2s and they're going to be significantly cheaper. They're still significantly cheaper right now, even though they share a fee market with L1. But like when Blobs comes along, that's where the costs are going to collapse there. But in terms of actually freeing up L1, Yeah, I don't really think it's going to make a material difference there. And this goes back to a lot of discussions that the community is having around raising the gas limit as well. I think raising the gas limit will definitely have a pretty substantial effect, depending on how much we raise it by. Like, for example, if we were to double the gas limit, all else being equal, you would expect the gas price to maybe halve, essentially. But it doesn't really work like that. It's more complex than that. And we don't actually know until we were to do it. And then there's obviously the concept of induced demand, which is a hotly debated topic within the community. And it's a hotly debated topic within just like general kind of conversations when it comes to supply and demand. It's not really just with a crypto context, but it's also within the context of things like traffic management. It's the age-old thing of, well, we shouldn't build more lanes because those lanes are just going to get filled up straight away because we induce more demand by saying, okay, well, this highway had 3 lanes, but now it has 5 lanes and there's more capacity. Well, by saying that, it's basically saying to everyone, well, okay, all the people that weren't using the highway before are now going to use the highway, and then you've induced that demand, right? But then there's the other side of the equation that says, well, now we're just servicing more users. So it shouldn't be a reason not to create more, I guess, space for people just because that's going to get filled up. Like, that's a good thing. But then you go into the nuance of things and you're like, okay, well, what are you giving up to do that? Obviously, with a highway, if you don't have the land, you have to build it, or to build extra lanes, you have to start reclaiming land. Okay, well, maybe does that land belong to someone? Does that land have housing on it that you would have to as a government pay out or seize the housing in order to build that highway? Like, there's always trade-offs here, right? And then you think about it in the Ethereum context. Okay, if we raise the gas limit too high, do we start kicking off a lot of the lower powered nodes on the network? And of course we do, because by doubling the gas limit, you effectively double the size of the Ethereum blockchain, and then you're starting to kick off more and more people off the chain. Now, as I mentioned the other day, it is obviously more complex and nuanced than that. It's not just a straight equation like that, and there are lots of things being worked on with regards to statelessness and state expiry and the whole Verge roadmap there. But I'm saying, like, if we were to do it today, because people are calling on it today, right? They've been calling on it for a little while now, and maybe we could raise it like 2 times it today and it would be relatively okay. But I think that also the fact that we're about to launch 4844 blobs, which puts more strain on the network, we should wait for that to happen, then have a discussion around raising the gas limit in maybe like 3 months after that, because we want to let that bake and let that settle on the network and then potentially raise the gas limit. And the nice thing about the raising the gas limit, it doesn't require a hard fork. All it requires is a flag to be set on the clients that people running validators will run, and then you basically do what's called vote up the gas limit. So essentially you get buy-in from the whole kind of node operator network, and then you vote it up. And that works in a kind of, I guess, like subjective way, where essentially it becomes a social signaling thing, where it's like, okay, the core devs are on board, the core researchers are on board, general community's on board, the node operators are on board, okay, let's vote up the gas limit, sort of thing. So I think that will happen. Post 4844, probably a few months after it, there'll be calls for it to happen, but I can't see it going much more than a 2x in that kind of time period there. Longer term, I can definitely see it going way higher than that. We could potentially see 10, 20, 30x sort of thing, but that's when we have things like state expiry, statelessness, the vertical trees, the general Verge roadmap, because then we can do it safely without having to kick off lower powered operators off the network and giving up decentralization, which is the whole point of a layer 1 blockchain, as you guys know. So yeah, that's how that all relates to, I guess, kind of this graphic that ETHWave put out. But I like seeing these graphics too, because it allows us to visualize what the network is actually being used for at the end of the day. I mean, and you can also look at other things, not just these graphics. You can go to Ultrasound Money and see which contracts burn the most ETH, and over different periods of time as well, which is always a fun little exercise to do. But yeah, anyway, thanks to ETHWave for putting this out there. It prompted a really good kind of thought process in my mind when I first saw this, and that's what I just basically told you guys. I always like talking about this stuff. It's one of my favorite topics because it is so nuanced, and people try to simplify it, but then you dive into the nuance and you realize just how much there is to it. So I enjoy talking about it with you guys. All right, moving on. So Rated.network has now added EtherFi to their dashboard. So as you guys know, Rated Network will track the market share of Ethereum validators on the network. And the reason I'm highlighting this update is because EtherFi is no small fish. They are number 6. So they are only behind Lido, Coinbase, Binance, Rocket Pool, and Kraken. So they have 1.59% of the network. Now, as you guys know, I'm an advisor to EtherFi. I just want to disclose that there. But there's a couple of reasons why I'm bringing this up. Firstly is that, wow, they're already number 6. Like, that's crazy growth. Secondly, that growth has happened really, really quickly. They are a relatively new protocol, and they're already number 6 here. And they could be top 5 very soon. I mean, Kraken's not that far away in terms of percentage terms here. 3, this shows you the power of economic incentives. Obviously, EtherFi has run a campaign for quite a while now, where essentially you can farm EtherFi points, which is going to get converted into their token, which they already announced, and then you can farm Eigenlayer points, which is going to get converted into it's assumed that it's going to get converted into the Eigenlayer token at some point as well. And the real kicker was the fact that EtherFi got around the deposit limits of Eigenlayer because they were doing it as a kind of like, they were creating Eigenpods, so they're doing it as like a solo staker essentially. So they weren't using LSTs, they were setting up eigenpods, which was unlimited. There was no cap in the amount of ETH you can put in, and they also have their own LST, obviously known as ETH here. And what's really cool about this as well is that EtherFi is not just one entity. There are actually 10 entities right now that are running the kind of EtherFi network here, and you'll see some familiar names that are part of other networks as well, like Nethermind, for example, is one of the node operators. They're quite a small share, but they're there. Peer 2, they've been around for a little while. All Nodes, Cosmos Station. There's a bunch of them here. So it works like a Lido model, I guess, where you'll have the entity sitting on top, Lido or EtherFi, then you'll have the node operators underneath. EtherFi's plan is to open that up to many different node operators and to decentralize it. I think Lido's plan is also very similar to that, but they'll maybe move slower than EtherFi will. But that's obviously one of EtherFi's plans there. But I really like that because when you actually kind of look at this list here, you see Lido has 36 node operators, right? It's obviously better than having one because they have like 31.1% of the network. They have 36 node operators. But then you go into Coinbase, who has 14.3% of the network, and that's one entity. That's one node operator, technically. Binance, 4.1% at one entity. Kraken at 2.4%, one entity. Obviously, Rocket Pool at 2.6% has, thousands of node operators, which is really, really cool. And then EtherFi at 10, and then under that you've got like Ledger Live, which is 1, Bitcoin Suisse, which is 1, OKX, which is 1. So the fact of the matter is like, as for the reasons I outlined, is why I'm so excited about the fact that EtherFi has grown so quickly is because they're not your average staking protocol, right? They're actually, doing a lot of innovative stuff, and they've grown really, really quickly because of those financial incentives. And this goes back to what I've been saying for, it'd have to be like at least 12 months at this point, probably 18 months, where I said that the only way you're going to reduce the dominance of the bigger players, in particular Lido and Coinbase, is by competing with them. Like the social signaling stuff is fine, the social layer stuff is fine, it actually raises awareness, and I'm all for doing that, but it has to actually turn into action. You can't just like say things and expect things to happen. It actually has to turn into action. And protocols like EtherFi and Swell and Puffer and Renzo and a bunch of others, I mean, there's so many now, have been doing that, right? Have been competing and continuing to compete and have been basically preventing Lido from growing bigger than what it has. Yes, Lido's been stuck around 31-32% for quite a while now, but that's a good thing. It means that their relative market share has not grown. Their real market share has, of course, because more ETH has been staked across the board, but their relative market share has not grown and has basically, I would say, like retraced a little bit. Obviously, it's not too big here. And you still have Puffer's Vampire Attack to come as well. But, considering all of that, taking all that into account, it's just great to see this. And I actually can't wait for A-Rated Network to add the other entities here. I think Puffer would be quite big as well because they have, over $1 billion at least, probably $1.5 billion or something worth of ETH. So I think they should be over 1%. Swell should be close to that as well. I'm not sure on the other ones. I know there's Mantle as well as Renzo and a few others out there. So if you add all those up, like that's just awesome. It's just really cool because you've got like more and more entities now that are relatively small, I guess, but still, like they're not just one entity. Like as I said, with EtherFi, there is obviously the EtherFi entity is one entity, but like the 10 node operators underneath, they have plans to be a fully decentralized staking protocol. So do the other ones like Swell and Puffer and a few others out there. So we're actually kind of, I wouldn't say slaying the Lido beast, but we're preventing the beast from getting bigger, which is the whole point of this. And I'm really, really glad to see it kind of come to fruition and to see a lot of the stuff that I talked about a while ago come to fruition. Because as I said, like I think I said this probably 2 years ago. I don't know. It was a long time ago. I said that Ethereum staking is like a giant ship. and turning the ship around takes a long time. That reshuffling that I spoke about a while ago now takes a while to play out, but we're seeing it play out. It's just that we have to kind of look back and see kind of how things play out over the longer term rather than over the short term. And I think I remember saying that a year ago when Chappella went live, actually just under a year ago, it was 11 months, so it'll be next month. I said that I'd love to do an analysis on that date in a year and see how the staking landscape has changed. And I actually consider it to have changed dramatically in the last year. I mean, we got the advent of liquid restaking tokens, which have really changed things pretty substantially. Coinbase's market share has come down, Lido's market share stopped growing, so on and so forth. So I hope someone does do an analysis like 1 year post Chappella. If not, I'll do like my own cursory kind of analysis to see how things shaked out there. But yeah, I mean, it's a multi-year long process. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's generally how I kind of look at all of this. All right, speaking of Swell, they are teasing something on Twitter. So it seems like they are going to have their own chain. I mean, you can see here that they've got 4 logos surrounding their own logo in this video. So they've got Polygon, Eigenlayer, Chainlink, and Alt Layer. So my assumption, or I guess like my, my guess is that they're going to be creating their own Polygon chain, or maybe, something to do with Alt Layer as well, like, because these things are layer 2 as a service kind of things, Polygon CDK, and also the alt layer kind of CDK, or the alt layer stack as well. But you've also got like Chainlink as well, which would be price feeds, obviously, and then Eigenlayer, which is part of the whole restaking thing here. So to speculate, I would say that Swell is going to be launching their own L2, and that's going to be a restaking layer for people to interact with in order to save on obviously gas costs, and to make things faster, to make entering and exiting Swell a lot more seamless as a kind of product here. So I'm excited. I'm excited for this. I don't know when this is going to be announced. I mean, you guys know I'm also an advisor and investor in Swell, but I haven't really heard anything about this. I haven't asked about it. I don't like kind of getting any inside information, if you will, about these sorts of things. Because I actually like being surprised myself, because it gets me more excited, not having advance notice of things, if I'm being honest. But yeah, I mean, this is cool. I'm actually curious to see how this plays out here, because like I've said in the past, I think we have a lot of like L2s, but I think that if you're building within an existing ecosystem instead of spinning up your own totally new thing, that's the way to go about it. Because if they do build with Polygon, then they've got access to Polygon's entire kind of suite, which is their aggregation layer that they're building, which basically sits underneath all of the Polygon chains. And then there's interoperability there, there's composability there. So they become part of that ecosystem, just like how within Optimism you have OP Mainnet and Base and Mode and a few others out there. And then Arbitrum, you have Arbitrum 1 and the Orbit chains and stuff like that, right? Nova and all those sorts of things. And there are other ones out there, other frameworks, but that's how I kind of see it playing out. All these quote unquote super chains, these super L2 chains, being the kind of home for people to launch their own chain on, and then everything becomes interoperable, especially obviously with Ethereum as well. And then you have like things further down the line, like pre-confirmations or base pre-confirmations, and boosted base boosted rollups. Like there's so much coming, guys. It's actually super exciting just thinking about how much stuff is coming when it comes to the L2 space, and how many things are actually being kind of improved upon at a rapid pace. But yeah, we'll have to see what Swell comes up with. Maybe they'll announce it this week. Probably not going to announce it on a weekend, but we'll see what they come up with and what they announce over the next few days. All right, speaking of Arbitrum, you guys know that I think a few weeks ago it was announced that Arbitrum Orbit L3s are now able to be launched on not just Arbitrum's L2, but any L2. So you can launch it on Base as an L2, you can launch it on OP Mainnet, you can launch it on one of Polygon's L2s. It doesn't matter where you launch it, because it's now supported by Conduit here, which is really cool, because it means that you're not locked into any one ecosystem. You can use the best tech to settle wherever you want. Like L3s are, I remember saying that L3, the terminology would get made fun of, and it for sure has. I mean, I see people kind of making fun of it all the time, but I think that when it comes to the mental model around L3s, all you got to do is think about them as app chains, really. Like they're probably going to be like the real app chains, whereas the L2s themselves will be generalized, like the most successful L2s. And then if you want like the actual app chains, the specific app chains, then they probably will gravitate towards L3s, because it all depends on, I guess, like flexibility, like how much flexibility you want to have when building these things. And it also depends on on things like cost as well. L3s are going to be cheaper, but it's also a security thing because as an L3, you're now relying on the L2 for settlement, and the L2 obviously relies on the L1. But if the L2 that you're relying on goes offline, the L1's not going to help you in any way because you now have cut off that kind of I guess like middle layer between you and the L1, so you go offline as well. So it is more risky there, but that's why I think with L3s it's going to be specific app chains, probably for lower value use cases that don't need the the security of L1, and there are. And they're probably better than creating something like a full-blown Validium or something like that, right? Where essentially you store the data kind of like off-chain and you get less security guarantees than you were to do it on-chain. But at the same time, it's kind of a similar trade-off where with an L3, you're now relying on the L2 and that's your weakest link. So you're now only as secure and as available as the L2 that you're settling to. So we've already seen the L2s go offline multiple times, right? Like that because they're basically in very early stages or have been traditionally. Arbitrum 1 has gone offline. I believe OP Mainnet has gone offline. I believe even Base has gone offline. So if that was to happen and you built an L3 on one of these things, your L3 is going to also, offline's like maybe the wrong term here because you can still process transactions, but you wouldn't be settling them to anywhere. It would be like in a backlog, and those transactions would be optimistic in that you have to basically wait until the L2 comes back online, so you can settle to the L2 and then settle to the L1, and then they become more finalized than optimistic, basically. But you could still process transactions. The L3 wouldn't necessarily go offline. Your kind of settlement guarantee just wouldn't be there, though. That's why I'm saying like it just depends on what you need, what kind of security level you need there. But anyway, the reason I'm talking about it is because Conduit, one of the I guess like teams working in the rollup space, introduced Arbitrum Orbit L3s on Base. So they basically made a really easy tool to use where you can basically just click and launch your chain. Like it's literally a few clicks and there you go. You've launched your L3 on Base here. You can pay with a credit card and everything. Like it's actually pretty cool how quickly this is to deploy. So you can go check that out. I'll link that in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, Espresso Systems, a team building a shared sequencer kind of stack, has announced today that they are looking at based Espresso, which is going to be their latest development towards a future of composable L2s. They say here, this design sees L2s retain autonomy over their sequencing rights and supports any Ethereum L2 from based rollups to Validiums. So a major concern around shared sequencers is the fact that when you join a shared sequencer network, you do give up autonomy and you do give up or potentially give up fee revenue for your own network and control over things like MEV and a bunch of other stuff, right? So there is a thesis floating around that basically says, well, why would any of the L2s want to join a shared sequencer network, right? Like if they give up all this stuff to just become composable with other L2s, is there an incentive for them to do that, right? Is the trade-off worth it? And then people come along and say, okay, well, let's not force them to do that. Let's still retain composability. Let's still retain all those good properties, but let's still give them their autonomy. And I think that's where Espresso comes in with this based system, which allows the L2s to, as I say, retain autonomy over their sequencing rights, which means over the rights to order transactions, which is stuff like MEV for their respective networks and obviously fee revenue and all that sorts of stuff there, and supporting both based rollups and Validiums. So not just rollups themselves, but also Validiums, which is really great to see. So there's a blog post here you can check out to outline how they imagine Espresso as really being a marketplace for shared sequencing versus being just a shared sequencer, and that's exactly what what they're talking about today would go to addressing. Because as I mentioned, like just being a shared sequencer itself is probably not going to be enough to get buy-in from different teams because they give up so much. But creating a marketplace around it would hopefully realign incentives around all of this and basically have like a market-based approach to getting these teams to want to use this technology. But anyway, I'm running out of time here and I've got one last thing I wanted to talk about, so I just wanted to put that on your radar. You can go check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, last thing here is just a tweet from Sriram, the founder of EigenLayer, that I thought was really interesting and really reframed a bunch of stuff in my mind. So he tweeted out, "We have been selling blockchains as offering censorship resistance and property rights to users. While a noble cause, this is hard to gather enough support for. We should instead sell censorship resistance and property rights to developers. Developers have no rigid property rights to build on top of an API or digital platform. The API can change or censor a developer willy-nilly, even more when a developer acquires traction they are sure to be cut out. This is the unlock for the rapid growth of the digital economy, with rigid property rights that a digital API is immutably available to be accessed in a verified manner, and censorship resistance. Other devs can build on top of digital platforms and API at an unparalleled pace. So I totally agree with this. I think generally when I talk about censorship resistance, I'm actually talking about with regards to both users and developers, or basically anyone, any kind of ecosystem participant, anyone using the chain. So like, I'm not just focused on users, but a lot of people do focus on users and forget just how powerful it is for developers. And to give an example here, a lot of you may remember that in the early days of platforms like Facebook, people could build third-party clients for Facebook. They could build on Facebook's API. It was relatively open. It wasn't totally open. You had, you obviously had to follow certain rule sets, and obviously, you're at kind of like Facebook's mercy, but it was relatively open. You could build clients on top of it. Now, of course, this wasn't good for Facebook because it meant that if people were using third-party clients, they weren't using the Facebook client and they weren't being served the ads that Facebook wanted you to see. That your data was not being mined in the same way because you're not using their client. They can't kind of mine your browsing habits, stuff like that. So they shut that down. And so did everyone else. Twitter used to have this ability. Reddit had this ability and still kind of has it in some capacity, but they made it very expensive for this to happen, and that's simply a economic incentive for them to do that. Obviously, it all comes back to economic incentives at the end of the day. Whereas within Ethereum, no one can do that with a truly decentralized protocol. I mean, this is the whole point of Farcaster, right? Where Farcaster is being built as a protocol which anyone can build a client on top of, and then it's decentralized, so no one can stop you from doing that. So there's no kind of master switch to turn it on and off. And I think the clearest example of this is, outside of Farcaster, is Uniswap. Uniswap is a truly decentralized DeFi protocol that exists on Ethereum L1, other layers. It has been there for a very long time. Uniswap V1, V2, and now V3, and in the future V4. And there are plenty of different interfaces to interact with Uniswap. And this is only possible because of the fact that the Uniswap API, aka the smart contract, is open source, is decentralized, is immutable, and cannot be switched on and off by a master switch. And this gives developers confidence that they can build their products on top of these things without just being rugged, essentially, which is incredibly powerful. As Shreya mentions here, we do not have this in the Web 2 digital realm. Pretty much everything in Web 2 is very centralized, and anything that you try to build, if it gets big enough, will automatically be turned into a feature of that protocol, or they'll kill your app and then integrate it within kind of like their stack, or they'll kind of acquire you and then kill the version of the app that your users loved and then integrate it into theirs in order to monetize it. So really within the Web3 space, this is our kind of claim to fame. This is this thing that we should be selling. I'm not selling in the sense of like being a salesman, but like kind of putting out into the world that, hey, yeah, okay, we built these networks as censorship resistance for users. They can do whatever transaction they want. Yeah, okay, sometimes criminals will use it, just like they use the normal things like cash to move money around, stuff like that. That's just part, that just comes with the territory of interacting with any financial system. But the real powerful thing is for developers. It's like, hey devs, like how many times have you felt like you were going to get rugged by different APIs because they're centralized? Well, here's an API that here's a bunch of APIs called smart contracts that are built on decentralized ledgers, on censorship resistant ledgers that you can go into and you can play around with and you can build stuff on. And you're not going to get rugged for doing that. So that is probably more powerful than kind of like any other thing that we can kind of talk about when it comes to these networks and it comes to censorship resistance of blockchains. But anyway, on that note, I'm going to end it there for today. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all on Monday. Thanks everyone.